Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very honored to be interviewing a very, very special space champion, Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker is a former manager at NASA Johnson Space Center and is an actor in community theater. Apart from being an amazing space professional who worked at NASA for a very long time, in which his office provided contract management support to the Flight Operations Directorate, the Safety and Mission Assurance Office, the Human Resource Office, and the Office of the CFO at the Johnson Space Center, and included support to operations at NASA's aircraft operations. Mr. Baker is also a very active member of his community by volunteering in programs like GirlStart and Special Olympics Texas. I'm so excited to learn about Mr. Baker's journey into the space industry and more about his volunteer work. Welcome, Mr. Baker. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to conduct this interview.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to learning about how you really got into the space industry and understanding your journey. But before we go into your journey more in depth, I'd first like to know about your typical day now that you're retired and how it was when you worked at NASA. How was your day like?
Yeah, and so obviously they're very different. I did retire about 4 years ago when I was working. So as you mentioned, I worked in, I call it a business office or procurement, contract management. What we did was, most people don't realize that NASA spends almost 90% of its funding on contracts. For example, there are 10 NASA centers, and the Johnson Space Center is the one I spent most of my time at. And there are only about 3,000 NASA employees supporting the Johnson Space Center. There are about 13,000 contractor employees working and supporting. And so, one of the very first things I got to work on in the late 1970s, before the first space shuttle flight in 1981, was literally buying the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. We had, as was kind of referencing, NASA buys its rockets and its engineering support and all kinds of other things, from support and mission control from aerospace companies. And so this was we bought the space shuttle orbiter vehicles from a company called Rockwell. They're part of Boeing now. And actually Rockwell gave this to me, just as a gift for working with them back, almost 40 years ago now. An interesting thing about this, if you've seen many shuttle launches, the tank is normally orange. It's white in the model they gave me because the first two space shuttle flights, they thought it's super cooled liquid oxygen and hydrogen in the external tank, and they thought they needed to paint it white to help protect the temperature. And after the first two flights, they realized that they didn't really need to do that, and it saved 600 pounds of paint. Which is important. And so anyway, I love that my model has a white external tank when 133 of the 135 shuttle launches actually used an orange external tank. But anyway, back to the question, our office was buying the space shuttle orbital vehicles, and they cost about $2 billion each. And so and so the day-to-day was, soliciting, evaluating, negotiating, awarding, managing those sometimes billion-dollar contracts, and you can imagine with the federal government, everything has to be documented and paperwork, and so. Especially in my later years as a manager, I spent a lot of time just reading and reviewing. Sometimes the request for proposals are sometimes 200 or 300 pages, but I don't want to make it sound like that was boring, because it wasn't. And I will say that 42 years, up to the last, literally the last day, it was always interesting and challenging. I never ever got tired of working and supporting what NASA was doing. So now, that I'm retired. Again, things are much different, but I'm still very heavily involved. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but NASA is basically my whole life, and I can't get away from it. I don't want to get away from it. And so now I do a lot of volunteering. I'm lucky that I have a nice retirement from NASA, so I don't need to continue working. I don't need any outside income. So volunteering is perfect for me. You mentioned GirlStart, which is an organization that encourages young girls to become interested in STEM and Special Olympics. I also volunteer at the Space Center Houston, which I love. It's right next door to the Johnson Space Center, and it's all about NASA and space, of course. I'm on another thing that takes up a lot of my time, which I love, is I'm on the board of directors for the NASA Alumni League, which is a group of former NASA employees that get together. And again, our main purpose, we also do a lot of socializing and talking about NASA and space travel. And there are astronauts and flight directors in the group. The president of our board is a former astronaut, Bill MacArthur. But our main focus is, again, providing funds to organizations that promote STEM activities. So, and I do a lot of this. It's really funny, back when I was growing up, there was no such thing as personal computers or the internet or social media. And in fact, it's funny, my wife used to complain about me not having enough friends. She didn't think I spent enough time socializing and having friends. And in 2009, it was when I first joined Facebook. And then soon after, I joined LinkedIn. And then I got on Twitter and then Instagram. And now I've even joined a fairly new social media called Clubhouse. And so it's just almost overwhelming. I have 50,000 connections on LinkedIn and thousands of followers on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and Clubhouse, and I love it because literally all over the world people are interested in NASA. And so I speak to students and space societies and astronomy clubs and do interviews. And so, it's an opportunity for me to get to talk about NASA, and I love it. So I'm having just about as much fun, or maybe more fun, and that doesn't even mention the theater, because we've kind of had to shut that down with social distancing, although we're starting to come back up. I'm having as much fun now as I did actually working at NASA.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear how you're so involved in your community and are able to, create an impact through outreach. I think one of the biggest things about the space industry and inspiring the future generation is actually reaching out and providing opportunities and awareness and knowledge. And so I'm really thankful that there are people like you who are taking their time to be able to talk with students like us. I think it's really inspiring to see your work and your passion for space.
And I appreciate what you're doing with this.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads me to my next question, which is I know you've been a part of NASA for very long, and so you probably had very cool projects and research that you might have worked on. So, what is the most exciting thing you've worked on?
Well, so I've been asked that before, and the most exciting and memorable thing for me was back in the mid 1980s. I got to work with one of the Apollo 13 astronauts, Fred Hayes. And I'll try to make this a quick story because I could talk about this for an hour. But I had been sent to actually the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for a year to work on a special project, which was this was the very early days of the space station program. In 1986 was when we started. And so, it was 12, 13 years later before we started flying elements up into space. The program was in the process of designing and developing, what the space station was going to be like. and they needed, again, contractor support. And so we wanted to award a contract for engineering support to an aerospace company to support the Space Station Program Office. And we had a competition. And so I was the lead contracting officer on that competition. And we picked Grumman as the winner of the competition. And so when they won, Grumman, where Fred Hayes had gone to work after he had retired from NASA, was appointed to be the new president of the new Space Station Program Support Division at Grumman. And so literally he and I negotiated this 10-year $1 billion contract to provide engineering support to the space station program. And so he signed the contract. I still have a copy of it. He signed the contract for Grumman and I signed it for NASA. And so then for about 2 years, and then we went our separate ways doing different things, he and I got to work together. I was in his office about once a week, for a management review kind of thing. And so he and I have stayed friends. We both moved back to Houston now. I'm even friends with one of his granddaughters. And I see him, fairly often, or at least I did before the pandemic hit us. And so anyway, that whole experience, first of all, getting to be involved with one of my heroes from Apollo 13 and working on such a major project like that. And again, this was the part I won't bore you with, which could make it a really long story. I got to do a lot of things I never would have done just because of the situation with me being sent off to the Kennedy Space Center and not really having a boss in my office like I normally would somewhere else. When I had to have something reviewed, I just went straight to the top. I didn't have to go through, different levels like I normally would. So anyway, that was my favorite NASA experience. If it's okay, I'll tell you one other really quick story that's even more exciting. It was when I was still in high school, because I grew up just a couple of miles from what was then the Manned Spacecraft Center. It's now the Johnson Space Center. I got a job. I was 17. I got a job with TV networks covering the Apollo missions. They would send crews down from New York and set up a mobile home, a trailer on site. And my main job, I did other various things too, but my main job was, because there was no such thing as the internet or videotape, when they filmed an interview with someone, the film had to physically be moved from Houston to New York, where the studios were, so they could show it on TV. So my main job was twice a day to drive that film to Houston Airport to put on a plane to fly to New York. And so for Apollo 12, when they were splashing down in the Pacific Ocean, this wasn't news, assuming everything went okay. It was just a local human interest story. They wanted film of Pete Conrad, his family, and he was the third guy to walk on the moon, the commander of Apollo 12. They wanted film of his family watching the splashdown on their TV in their living room, as it happened. And so they sent me and a cameraman to Pete Conrad's house. And so I was in his living room with his family, watching on TV with a cameraman there filming it. And this was over 50 years ago. It was November 1969. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember him walking into the next room and taking the film out of the camera, putting it in the canister and handing it to me. And they were in such a hurry to get this film, to get it on TV, that they didn't want to wait for me to drive 30 minutes to the TV station to drop it off. They had a helicopter waiting for me. So I drove back to across the street. There was an open field from the Johnson Space Center. There was a helicopter there waiting for me. And I'd never been in a helicopter. And so, so I got in, it's this really small thing, all clear glass, and I'm just hanging on, holding on for dear life. And the guy saying, yeah, I just got back from flying missions in Vietnam, and I think, boy, I'm glad nobody's shooting at us. And anyway, I still remember walking into the TV studio and handing the film to a woman standing behind the desk. And then I don't remember anything after that. It was like the adrenaline, was just, going crazy for that whole time until I let go of the film. And then it just, boom. I don't even remember the helicopter ride back to my car. But so anyway, just physical excitement and memories that, etched into my brain. That's probably the best space-related story I have.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know being able to, do such cool things even at such a young age and being involved, I think is amazing. And I think hearing your both stories was really exciting. I mean, as a high school student, I would love opportunities like that. I'm always seeking for those, and I'm sure students out there are always looking for internship opportunities. I know NASA has internship opportunities
Yes.
now. So it's definitely amazing ways to create stories. So I'm glad you shared two amazing ones with us today. So, from your past work, it seems that you have interest in many fields from space, like from management, and you're even interested in acting. So, could you tell us more about how you even develop these passions and if there's like a merging between them?
Yes, so I was in the band. I was actually band president my senior year at my high school, and so for our senior play, I guess most high schools still do a senior play.
Yes, we
I
do.
was not even in my senior play. I was down in the orchestra, and so I had never done any acting. And then and here it's NASA related in a couple of ways. One of my NASA friends had his wife was performing in a in it was Hello Dolly at this local theater, and he asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, "Yeah, sure." So I went, loved the play, loved the show, loved the theater, and so I asked, "Hey, how can I get involved?" I was, like 28 years old and still single, so I had plenty of time. And they said, "Well, our next show is Jesus Christ Superstar," and I said, "Oh, can I play in the orchestra?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So my first involvement actually was playing in the orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar at this theater, which, by the way, was was started by astronauts
Oh,
in the early 1960s when they all moved to Houston to, you know, train and work at the Manned Spacecraft Center. They decided they needed some, art. And so literally it was, Alan Shepard, Buzz Aldrin, Pete Conrad, and their wives that started this theater. And it's still going, 60 years later. But so I'm playing in the orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar, and we're just off the stage. And so, 14 performances or whatever it was. And I'm sitting in my chair when I'm not playing, watching what's happening, from literally just a few feet away. And I remember thinking, I could do that. And I always tried to instill in my sons, don't be afraid to try anything, and even if it looks hard or if it's hard at first, don't give up, and so I thought, I'm going to try this acting thing. And so the next show was a musical called Pippin. And so I auditioned and I was picked. And so I performed in that show. And so I actually did shows pretty regularly for a few years. And then I got married and had kids, and my job got more complicated. And so I dropped out for a while. And then, fast forward 30 something years, and my kids are grown and out on their own, and I'm retired. And hey, I have time for theater again. And so I got back into it. And actually, I was going to, ease back into it, so to speak. Before I had gotten back on stage, one of my friends from my early days was now on the board of directors for this theater. And it was around getting near Christmas time, and they were going to be doing Miracle on 34th Street. And so she called me one day and said, "Hey, are you available? They're doing Miracle on 34th Street, and they need a Chris Kringle. You would be perfect." And I'm like, wow. I was going to ease back into this. I didn't want to be the star of the show,
yeah.
after not being on stage for 30 years. But anyway, once again, I thought, hey, uh, okay, it's a challenge. I'm going to do it. And I did it, and I loved it. I had so much fun. And so now, that was about 2 years ago, and I've done about 5 or 6 shows since then. Although my last one was a year ago, I haven't been really back out into the public much at all for the last year now. But anyway, and it's funny because I was listening to astronaut Nicole Stott the other day, and she was talking about how important the arts are. And even on the space station, you have Chris Hadfield playing the guitar, and Ellen Ochoa and Katie Coleman playing the flute, and Nicole herself, painting watercolors. And, just again, making the point that, art and STEM or space, go together. And she said something like, if you're going to spend 3 to 6 months with a small group locked up in a relatively small area, you would want them to have, interesting other activities, and not all be exactly like you. So anyway, yeah, I believe in the STEAM, actually, that art could be combined with STEM.
Yeah, 100%. I'm also a STEAM advocator. I definitely think art, goes hand in hand with, math, science. I think the way you visualize concepts and everything, it has everything to do with art. So I completely agree. I'm really glad that you're able to find a passion like that. I know everyone sometimes gets so caught up with academics that they forget to find, another passion, another hobby that they have, whether it be sports or something artistic. So I'm really glad that you're able to do that, and always encouraged your sons as well to never give up and always try things out. I know my parents always say that. They're like, give it a try. It
Yeah,
might click for you. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. So my next question is, after many years of experience in the space industry and working at NASA, what is something important that you learned that you didn't know earlier?
Well, it's funny that you asked that question right now, because my answer to that is really what we were just talking about. Excuse me. Don't be afraid to fail. It's funny, you may have heard the kind of a popular NASA phrase, failure is not an option. It was Gene Kranz, the flight director during Apollo 11 and Apollo 13. He never actually said that. It was a line created for the Apollo 13 movie, but he uses it now. When he signs something, he signs, failure is not an option. But actually, and that's fine to say if 3 humans' lives are at stake. But for the most part, failure is an option, and failure should be a requirement. Um, and it's funny, people say, and again, we're just kind of talking about this, find your passion. But if you think something is interesting, or you think you might be passionate about it, just if your first involvement or look at it, if it seems too hard, or somebody tells you that no, you're not, that's not right for you, don't give up. There are a lot of things that are hard, and maybe your passion is something that it's worth getting through that difficult period to get to, oh, okay, it all clicks now, and yeah, this is my passion. I mean, even my job at NASA, again, business, contract administration, procurement, whatever you want to call it, I didn't know how to do that when I started my first day at NASA. I certainly wasn't going to say, "Oh no, sorry, I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to work for you guys." I thought, oh, if you want to teach me how to do it, I'll sure as heck, you know, learn. And so the first 6 weeks or so were spent in classes, and watching movies and reading about how to do this government acquisition job. And boy, I'm so glad I did, because I got to do it for 42 years, and as I mentioned, loved every minute of it.
Yeah, I always think it's always important to, don't give up because something is difficult. There's a few people that I've interviewed who are actually college students, and
Mm.
they were saying how they would fail a class, like they would get bad grades in their calculus class, for example, and they felt like demotivated, or they had the imposter syndrome that they weren't fit for the space industry.
Yes, yes, yes. Or,
Yeah,
the, or a teacher told them that, oh, you're never going to be good at this, or they don't see someone like them, in that field. Yes, there's so many. I hear so many of those stories myself.
yeah, I know the imposter syndrome was mentioned so many times, and they're always like, I had to battle out of it and just believe myself. And, even if it meant staying late up at nights or dedicating early mornings to studying calculus, I was going to do it and I was going to follow my passion. So I think that's definitely in hand with what you were saying.
Yeah.
And I see that, earlier, like we were mentioning, you're a very active member, as a volunteer in many nonprofit organizations and as a board member of many things. So, where do you get so much motive and energy to be such an active volunteer and help so many organizations and individuals?
Well, I think it's because so many people literally all over the world love space and what NASA is doing. And that's even interesting. I mean, because there's the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, the Russian, lots of other, India and, other, China, lots of countries have space agencies. And of course, it's NASA that went to the moon and landed on Mars and those kind of things. But it's kind of interesting to me that people literally all over the world just love NASA and space so much, and I love talking about it. And so it's it's just been kind of a natural fit. And again, as I was mentioning before, uh, the whole social media thing has just been incredible. I just like this. I love it when someone who's interested in hearing what I have to say, offers me an opportunity to do an interview or a webinar or a podcast or speak to their class. I have parents contact me that I've never met. We've just become uh, contacts, followers, whatever on social media, and they'll say, "Hey, my 5-year-old little girl is really interested in space. Would you chat with her?" And so yeah, we just do literally a one-on-one Zoom call with the family, and I've done that many times too. And so there's not much more at this point in my life that I enjoy more than doing this kind of thing. And I do remember too, at one point, uh, I think it was a teacher I was talking with, and she wanted me to speak to her class, third graders, and she said, "But how much do you charge?" I said, "Oh no." I said, I don't charge anything, and I never will charge anything. I do this just because I love doing it. And I think it's important, so I was not in a STEM field. Well, my degree wasn't, of course, but obviously working at NASA, I worked with a lot of people in STEM fields. And I think it's important, and a lot of them today, promote STEM education. And I've kind of fallen into that too. I think, yeah, that's important. I can see, I saw firsthand how important the STEM fields are. And so I think in part too, that's why I've felt kind of, I'm not sure obligated is the right word, but I wanted to do everything I could to help promote STEM fields, especially uh, children and girls and women, because we need more of them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing that. I think that's amazing that, you're taking some time to do, and it makes you happy to do and talk with other, children out there who are interested in space and providing them that energy, that motivation and role model example. It's really nice. And you're also mentioning the power of social media. I feel like there's always a bad rep these days that social media is really dangerous and it's not really good. But I feel like it can also be used for positive with like networking and meeting
Mm,
other like-minded individuals who are interested. For example, like the space community is amazing. I mean, the moment I started connecting with people on Twitter and or LinkedIn, I mean, everyone is so welcoming and so knowledgeable. I always learn something every day by like, viewing different profiles. It's not even, negative stuff on social media. It's like taking the positive out of it.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah, and you were also mentioning how, you were always interested in spreading STEM and you weren't actually a STEM background yourself. And part of the series is really to show students that you don't have to be good just at math or just at physics to be a part of the space industry or get involved or work at NASA if that's your dream job. You could have other interests. So could you tell us actually more about that? How did you get into NASA with like a non-STEM background?
that's kind of an interesting story too. And so again, I grew up with NASA. When I was in middle school, I was 13 years old when the Manned Spacecraft Center was built and opened, and all of the first two classes of astronauts, including the original seven, moved into my community. And suddenly their children were my friends and classmates in middle school and then all through high school. And so even with that, and so almost every person I knew my age either was an astronaut's child or the child or children of someone else who worked at NASA. And again, I mentioned even as a teenager, I worked for the TV networks covering Apollo 11, 12, 13, 15, and a couple of the Skylab missions, just as I was going away to college. Even with all of that, I was just not that good in science, and we didn't have an engineering class in high school, but I was pretty good in math. And so, business seemed like the right thing for me. And so that's what I majored in. And so the funny thing is, and I don't think, you ask about obstacles. I never really had any, I'm a white male. I realize how much privilege I have. Uh, so I never really had any obstacle. I guess the only thing I might consider as an obstacle is my family really never had much money. And I was the first person in my family to go to college, in fact. And so I had to work during the summer and even sometimes while I was still in school to pay for my education. And so what that leads me to is, while I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and it turns out that the IRS regional service center for like 5 states, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, is in Austin. And of course, the IRS is a federal government agency. And so I got a part-time kind of temporary job during the tax season, working there. And again, though, I'm business major. I don't really know what I'm going to do. And because there wasn't access to programs like this, where you have people telling other people that you don't have to be a genius to work at NASA, I'm thinking, as much as I love NASA and I'm interested in space, there's no way they're ever going to let me work there with, a business major. So I, didn't know what I was going to do, but I figured it would be something other than NASA, even though I would certainly have maintained my love and admiration for the people who were there and what they were doing. But because I was working, just coincidence, I guess, because what I thought might have been an obstacle turned out to be positive. While I was working at the IRS, I had friends there working with who were permanent employees. They weren't just, part-time college, short-term temporary jobs like me. And back then, to get a job with the government, you had to take exams, tests. And these were kind of clerical folks. And so they were looking for more professional jobs. And there was this thing called the Professional and Administrative Career Examination, PACE, they called it. And I remember them talking about it and how hard it was. And you got scores in 6 different, aptitudes or categories or skills. So that when you took the test, they tried to find out, what job you were best suited for based on your scores in those 6 different aptitude areas. And I remember they're talking about, again, it was really hard. And if you didn't score at least a 70% in one category, they just gave you a 0, you just didn't get a rating. And, how it was, some of them took it and didn't do very well. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm actually pretty good at tests. I think I'll take it anyway, just for the fun of it, right? So I took the test, got my scores back, and at first I thought there must be a mistake. I got 4 100s and 2 98s.
That's amazing.
And so the way it worked was, when you signed up for the test, assuming you did well, you told them which cities you would be interested in taking a job in, if the government wanted, if you did well enough for the government to want to hire you. And so I obviously put Houston. And so it turned out, and it never even occurred to me till it actually happened, that NASA's in Houston. And the way it worked was, when you finished taking the test, they sent your scores, with the highest at the top on the list, to all the government agencies in those cities that you had listed. And so I got a letter from NASA saying, hey, would you be interested in coming to interview for a job? And I'm like, what? Yes, I'll be there tomorrow. And so it's kind of funny, actually, in a way, then, NASA contacted me for a job. I didn't even know that I could or should
That's
contact them. And so, that one of the many really lucky things in my life. Um, but yeah, so again, I'm kind of a perfect example of how you don't have to be in a STEM field, or even be, certainly don't have to be a genius to work at NASA. And in fact, most people don't realize, obviously, the face of NASA are scientists and engineers and astronauts, and about a third of the NASA workforce are engineers, but about another third are business administrative people, human relations, finance, uh, procurement, all different kinds of things like that. And then another slightly less than a third are scientists and doctors and astronauts. But about a third of them are not in the STEM field.
wow. Yeah, I know. I talked to so many individuals, and seeing all these diverse careers is amazing. I mean, I was in middle school a few years ago, and I thought that I would have to either be an engineer and work at, try working at NASA, or I would have to like find a different career. I didn't know that you could merge different interests together, and it didn't even click to me, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this interview series, to really show that, you don't have to be just one engineer. There's so many options. It's just if you're interested in space, you can do it.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to participate with you in this too, is to preach that.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Yeah. And I'm curious, when you were growing up, was there ever like a mentorship or, a volunteer role, or even, as an adult, was there anything that helped you achieve your dreams?
Well, so in a way, I suppose, but and even though I mentioned before we started, I'm got a mentoring appointment soon after we're done here. So I do a lot of mentoring. I mentored a lot while I was working at NASA, and um, I also volunteer to be a mentor for uh, folks who get scholarships from the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, which is the one I'm doing uh, after this. But so growing up, I didn't really, there were no mentoring programs. And uh, the one that sticks in my mind was really about halfway through my career, believe it or not, that I think had a huge impact on me. And by that time, I'd worked at NASA for 15 or 20 years, and had seen a lot and worked with a lot of people and had a lot of managers and bosses. But that was right about the time uh, I had spent some time at NASA headquarters and came back to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And um, the guy who was the uh, manager of the business operations office for the Space Station Program Office in Houston was really uh, an awful, I'll try to say this as nicely as possible, an awful manager. I mean, he criticized people and yelled at people. I remember one particular time, there was a woman I worked with and respected a lot. He was, yelling at her so much she was literally crying there in the office. And I remember another time I was in a meeting and he was criticizing a guy, and I remember him saying, "You're no manager. You couldn't manage your way out of a paper bag." And I'm just like, wow, how are people saying things like that to other professional adults, at NASA? And at about, soon after that. And so I also had another case where I heard about actually a flight director, who I won't mention his name, but he's, fairly, almost, you might say, a legend, a very well-known flight director, who was known for being profane and loud and critical. And boy, if you had to make a presentation to him, you better know everything, and if you didn't, boy, he would just light into you. And so, it was not a pleasant thing to be around him. And so I'm seeing some of that. And then right about, soon after I got back here, turned out the guy I was working for was just 100% the opposite. He was he was a wonderful, caring guy who had a great sense of humor. again, he cared, literally, seriously cared about the people who worked for him. I mean, he didn't take any crap from anybody, though, and he expected you to do your job, and you better get it done when you said it was going to or needed to be done. But he was at least nice about it, reminding you, if and it made you want to help him and work for him and support him. And so I'm seeing these two different management styles, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be like him. He's just as successful or maybe more successful than these other guys over here who seem to think that management by fear is the best way to do things. And I don't like that at all. So anyway, it's kind of funny that happened after 20 years of my career, but that's one of the things I learned, I think, that sticks out in my mind more than most other things in that sense.
Yeah, I definitely learn by example. I think when you view other people, you're like, oh, this is how I should be, and this is how
Yeah,
I should not be.
yeah,
Definitely makes a difference.
yeah.
And I'm really curious, you've been a part of the space industry, you've seen so much rapid change, whether it be because of the demographics of, who works at the space industry or the actual technology that's been happening in the innovation. So how do you keep up with all this, skills and changes that are happening in the industry?
Well, and so that's different from when I was actually working. When I was working, so I was a member of a professional organization that focused on my industry. In fact, I became the president of that local Houston chapter for a year and was very active in it. And we had a magazine every month that kind of gave news on what was happening throughout the country, and even legislation in Washington D.C. that was coming up that might impact us. And we had a monthly meeting where we would have a speaker come in and tell us what was going on. We had seminars and conferences who we would invite. So there was more often than every month with the monthly meeting and the monthly magazine and the seminars and the conferences. It was really actually pretty easy to stay up to date with and current on the skills that were needed. So today, I guess I kind of feel like I'm in kind of three industries, still kind of in space, although don't have a job there, theater and nonprofits with all of the volunteering. And I guess I have to say, the way I stay up to date and current is social media.
Yeah.
It just, in fact, I don't know if you've heard about or probably haven't joined Clubhouse yet. It's just 100% audio. But again, there's, some really interesting discussions. I've only been on and you have to, it currently only works on iPhones and iPads,
Mhm.
and you have to get an invitation, although I have a few invitations to get out. But so it's not for everyone, at least at this point. But Elon Musk is on it, and several other very famous, well-known people have and they will open a room, and it can hold up to 5,000 people, and you just basically listen. You can ask, you can raise your hand with the app and ask a question. But anyway, I've learned a lot on that in the last month, and otherwise just and it's amazing, for most of the people who have had the internet since they can remember,
Yeah.
uh, many of us didn't. And so it's just amazing, which is different from the way it used to be, that today, if you want to learn something or figure out something or do some research or study something, just open your computer or phone and go to the internet. I mean, you can take MIT classes for free
Yeah.
on the internet. It's mind blowing to those of us who are, of a certain age that aren't used to having. When I was a kid, I used to read encyclopedias at night because, I wanted to learn things. And so yeah, it's much easier today if you really want to, to stay up to date and current with what's happening. In fact, it's hard to keep up
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. All the time, social media is a great way, an easy way to learn things. I'll definitely have to look into Clubhouse. I actually didn't know about it until you told me. So that's really cool.
So if you have an iPhone or an iPad and
Yeah.
you want an invite, just message me and I'll
Yeah. That would be amazing. And so I also, because of the skills that you're keeping up with, what is something that you're excited about the future of the space industry? And what is something that reserves you?
so so it's hard not to be excited with everything that's going on. I mean, this Inspiration 4 thing, you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, yeah. That's great. Yeah, I was looking at that.
and Artemis. I just heard one of the Artemis astronauts speak yesterday on Zoom, and SpaceX and Boeing and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. And I mean, that's just human space flight. It's just this company called Axiom Space is planning to build a commercial space station. And it's just,
Wow.
it's actually the guy, the president and CEO of that company is the guy I know, Mike Suffredini. He was the program manager for the space station while I worked in the space station program here in Houston. And he obviously retired from NASA, but he after being the program manager for 8 years or whatever it was, he knows about as much about the space station, the ISS, as anybody. But yeah, so that's all exciting to me. And I was actually involved with NASA's first contract with SpaceX that was awarded. I still have the signature page, a copy of the contract that Elon Musk signed. It was 2006. So it's most people don't realize that NASA's been working with SpaceX for almost 15 years now. So that's all. And again, like I mentioned, it's hard to keep up with. There's so
Yeah.
much, and it's just like something new every day. Um, uh, what concerns me a little bit is that so I've lived through actually, the first NASA tragedy was the Apollo 1 fire, and Grissom, Chaffee, and White. And so I'm still friends with two of Gus Grissom's sons. I saw Mark just a couple of years ago. And so one of the parents of my friends died, in a NASA fire back in 1968. And Judy Resnick was on Challenger. I used to do aerobics with her on Saturday mornings, not far from the Johnson Space Center. And for Columbia, um, Laura Clark, her son, my wife was a teacher. Her son was one of his students, and so you know, family and friends and coworkers, have lost. They just died from accidents in space, or on the Apollo 1 was on the ground, but and so I I still I'm just afraid it's so dangerous. I'm afraid it's going to happen. I think it has to happen again. I hope it doesn't, but I can't imagine that everything that's going on that somebody. I mean, the Starship again. You probably saw. Came back in and it looked like it had landed okay and then exploded.
Yeah, I know.
It's a dangerous, dangerous thing. And so what scares me is that the competition. There's so much competition, and somebody wants to do something best or be there first, that they're gonna, you know, cut a corner or something and say, well,
Yeah.
we don't really need to do that test, and something bad is going to happen. So that's what scares me. Again, I cross my fingers and hope every time, especially with there's humans inside, that a spaceship goes somewhere. But I'm just afraid eventually something bad is going to happen again.
Yeah, I know what excites me for sure is commercial spaceflight. I think that is an area that I get so excited whenever I hear. I think the idea that humans could go and, do conduct research in space and come back down and, apply it to people on Earth and help, treatments and diseases. I think honestly, just commercial spaceflight in general excites me in many aspects. It's really exciting for the future, but I definitely agree that there are, some companies that cut corners all the time are like, oh, let's take this out, that's not necessary, or sometimes
Well, even NASA, did that to some extent. We got a little too complacent with the foam hitting the tiles on, that caused Columbia, and so it can happen to anybody.
Yeah, and sometimes even small issues we overlook, thinking, "Oh yeah, that's going to be okay," but we don't know what that small thing could trigger, and it's just, it's a little. You have to be always very cautious with whatever we do. Definitely agree. And to wrap up the interview, I really wanted to ask you one last question that could tie this interview together, which is, what advice do you have for young people regarding their pursuit of a passion in the STEM field or the space industry? Something that you wish you knew when you were younger.
Well, and so we've already talked about it a little bit. And again, I wasn't personally involved in STEM, but it's don't be discouraged. Again, if you start looking at it and it looks like it's too hard, don't give up. Or like we said, if you don't see someone who looks like you in that field, be the first, or be one of the few. It's hard sometimes, but it can be very well worth it, getting past the hard part, the struggles. And like I said, I like to say, my friend Gene Kranz likes to say failure is not an option. I like to say failure is an option, and again, I'm sure you've heard this. If you're not failing at least every once in a while, you're not trying hard enough. And in fact, I have it on my a little, a magnet on my refrigerator. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, "Do at least one thing every day that scares you." And that's I think that's pretty good advice. I mean, that's that's easier said than done, right? And
Yeah,
I
of
don't
course.
find something every single day, but that's always in my mind. If I think of something or see something, my first thought is, "Oh, that's too scary," and I thought, "Wait a minute, here's my chance to do something scary today." And almost every time, I'm glad I did it. It turns out to be not nearly as hard as I thought it was, or if it was, it turns out that it was worth every bit of the struggle. So anyway, I hope that's helpful to someone.
That's definitely helpful. I know as a student myself, sometimes you can be like not encouraged, or sometimes you stay in your own little personal bubble because you're afraid to like step out of it or get out of your comfort zone and meet people or talk with people you don't know that well. I know it's definitely like you just have to be confident and just like try. I think that quote you said was amazing. I think always trying to do one thing that's difficult or one thing that you think is hard or something you don't want to do and just like grow yourself as a person.
Right. And so that reminds me, one last thing I
Yeah.
like to talk about is, you know, because I think I was like this growing up. I might be afraid to do something because I was afraid that the people who saw me or watched me or heard about me doing it, if I failed, might, be critical of me or make fun of me. It turns out that more often than not, if you do something that's hard and you fail, they're impressed that you were willing to try it, even though you weren't sure if you were going to be successful or not. So, you know, I think that's a good mindset to have too. Is don't be worried about what you think somebody's going to think about you if are looking bad. They're more likely than not to say, "Wow, that took a lot of guts." I should keep that kind of uh, eh, philosophy in mind.
Yeah, even something simple as raising your hand in class when no one else is. I think, as a student, that's a big thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I definitely thank you so much, Mr. Baker, for this wonderful conversation. I truly believe the advice of never giving up and always trying new things is something that we should all take with us today. And I want to thank you for sharing your space story with us. Your stories were definitely super fun to hear, and I'm really thankful for your time today.
I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.